All right, good morning, everyone.
Morning, Tammy.
Woo, I love it. We're going to have so much fun on this panel today. There are a lot of seats down here. We smell great, so join us up here. There's the best swag I have seen at a conference. This takes me back, this cassette tape and all the logos on there. It is epic. Whoever did that, first class, top notch. All right, great panel. We have combined AUM on this stage in the billions, which is phenomenal. I am excited. I'm going to give you a brief intro of everyone here because I think you need to know the gravitas of these incredible venture partners, and I'm going to share a little bit. Firstly, Jim. Fulcrum Equity has raised over $985 million across 4 funds and has invested in over 400 companies, SaaS tech-enabled businesses, healthcare and healthcare IT. Your experience spans over 30 years in areas of operations, strategic development, and financial experience. So many of the metrics today will fall into these areas. Eric, next up. Insight is one of the largest SaaS investors with over 500 companies invested. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. And you focus specifically on SaaS, and you recently joined Insight, which is an investment department that helps the engine that helps these companies scale faster and more efficiently. So you have over 140 advisors on the Insight partnership team, and you have certainly sat in your seat in sales and marketing world.
You nailed it.
How about that? All right, and Brooks, a remarkable career to date. You are now on the opposite side of the table, and over the past 20 years, you have led multiple high-growth companies. I had to write this down because remembering every single one of them was going to take a while. All right, high-growth companies, the co-founder, CEO, CMO, and CRO. You've grown annual revenue from 0 to 110 million in 4 years and achieved 1.2 billion in enterprise value post-IPO. This is your audience. I'm excited. All right, so we're going to get started. These are metrics that matter. It is important. From now, you are hearing from the venture side. Let's get started. Jim, Fulcrum focuses on high-growth SaaS companies. What are the top 3 metrics that you prioritize when evaluating a growth stage investment?
Yeah, so we start in that kind of, is this on? We start in that kind of 2 to 10 ARR, growing 50 to 100%. So growth is the first one, and Eric and I were talking earlier. A metric is a license to get a head fake. It's really what's behind the metric. So behind that growth rate, we're really trying to look at the bookings momentum of the business, the top of funnel momentum of that created those bookings, so that we can really understand that growth rate is sustainable and diversified and not 1 or 2 customers. So growth rate first and foremost at our stage, because we're trying to take a $2 to $10 million business towards 30 to 50 million and sell it up the food chain to some guy like this. And then beyond that, it's retention. It's with your growth rate, you can get the dog to eat the dog food, but can you get them to keep it? And the retention really has 2 pieces to it. One, gross retention, which is my product sticky? Are they seeing value in my product? And then the other one that really is as important, more important, is net retention. Am I able to sell more to that existing customer? And beyond that, it's not, you can have a good metric, but what's the roadmap and the vision beyond that that's going to drive that net retention? So this company can wake up every January and be up 20%, because we all know that having run these companies, man, new bookings are hard. You can't just keep growing a business with new bookings. You've got to get, if you want to maintain a high growth rate, all these ones that have high growth rates, the only way they're there, high net retention. So we focus a ton on that. And then finally, efficiency metrics. And the efficiency is, one obviously is sales efficiency, CAC LTV, but also just overall efficiency. We want capital efficient entrepreneurs. So I always say, I'll let you burn $1 to create $1, because any 50 to 100% growth business is going to be trading at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I need to make 3 to 4 times my money, right? So if I give you $1, you create $1. Pretty good, kind of keeps it inside the goalpost. There's a lot more to it, but we want those kind of capital efficient businesses.
Yeah, I think that's a great start, those three to focus on. I'm going to move it over to Insight and talk about these high growth companies that you work with. Eric, tell me a little bit about those specific growth metrics that are indicative of a successful company.
Yeah, they're not too different from what Jim had said. So we always look at Rule of 40. Just by show of hands, who here knows what Rule of 40 is? If not, I'm happy to explain it. Okay, so about half. I think about Rule of 40, you just simply add your year-over-year growth, let's just say 20%, and your free cash flow margin, say 20% together, and that gives your rule of. And so it's kind of a nice way of understanding how fast are you growing juxtaposed with how profitable, so to speak, are you. So we look at that quite frequently. The other piece we look at, Jim mentioned this before as well, is CAC payback, which you can all you really need to think of it as is the summation of your sales and marketing expenses divided by your bookings or your revenue. It effectively tells you how efficient you are. The one other piece we like to do, or I like to do, is to break it down by geos, by teams, and I'd actually recommend all of you do that too if you're working for a company, because that will tell you what geography am I most efficient in, what product am I most efficient in, what team am I most efficient in, what market am I most efficient in, and that can help you decision as you decide, hey, where do I invest?
Yeah, that's great. I think what I want to shift now, I think we've gone across the board and now to those later stage companies. Brooks, how important in evaluating companies is their future profitability and their potential in your evaluations?
Yeah, so as we focus on more of the mid-market, which would be companies that are 25 million in revenue, kind of on the low end, up to maybe 200 or 300 million on the high end. Really our sweet spot probably is that 50 million to 150 million. So, but what's interesting though is the three metrics we do focus on, Rule of 40. So
hey, you're stealing my question, my next question. Go for it.
I think we believe we invented it, Rule of 40. I'm not sure.
I know what you're
I think we
talking
did
about.
too, right? I think what's interesting though on Rule of 40, it's a progression on Rule of 40. It's not so much where you are now, but do we see a progression, kind of your question around the current versus the historic. Many of our companies that we invest in, they start off at Rule of 20. So they might have 5% profitability, they're growing at 15%, but we see a path that they can get the Rule of 40 over the course of 2-3 years, sometimes 4 or 5 years, depending on the level of investment we want to make. So that would be probably our number one lens that we look at. Net dollar retention shows the health of a business. We're very focused on that, really understanding is there ample white space, the opportunity to go upsell, cross-sell to your base, as well as getting new logos, and then can you keep the customers you have? And then magic number is something that we really focus on. So magic number, a lot of people do that math a little bit different. How we do it is just take, because we try to keep it really simple, because many times we just look at your income statement, is we take how much are you driving in new bookings, both new sales as well as cross-sell, upsell. So how much are you selling in a quarter on an ARR basis, and then divide that by how much you're spending on sales and marketing. And we want to see that kind of progression, kind of what Jim was saying, are you spending $1 to get $1, and how efficient are you getting, and are you getting more efficient? Because that allows us to understand where we should be investing going forward. So I think in terms of the past versus the future, I mean, we do spend a lot of time on the past, because a lot of what we're looking at is companies, are they ready to kind of start to scale their business, and are they ready to really get on that path to Rule of 40?
Yeah, Brooks, I think that's an important question, and you talk a lot about those later stage companies. You invest at that 50 million plus as your sweet spot. We have a lot of earlier stage companies in the room today. How much does that lens through which you look at as an investment apply to an earlier stage company and some of those metrics? Is that something that they should be focused on now and leading into that, or how do you keep that relevancy now?
Well, I've had a lot of fun in early stage as well. So I think it's really about product market fit, and so trying to find metrics. So I wouldn't get as focused on Rule of 40 and those efficiency things that early. It's more about being effective early on than being efficient early on. So I'm looking for clues around, do you have product market fit? So what are your win rates? What are your loss rates against certain competitors in certain product categories? What kind of adoption are you seeing? Like daily average user, time on site, those kind of things. Okay, I've got something here that the market needs. those are more valuable to me in earlier stage.
Yeah, I think.
And if you just add a little bit to that, if you have a high gross margin business, which we all want, right? And you have the efficiency from a sales perspective you talked about, you'll get to rule of 40 with any reasonable growth rate. So it's like you should probably have a vision for how I'm going to get there in an early stage, and we kind of try to coach our under $20 million companies to, all right, let's have a vision of how we're going to get there, because more and more it is important once you cross over that 20, 30 million range. Man, you better have a story. It better be obvious how you're getting there. And so you don't have to wait to think about that. You can kind of run, Excel's a beautiful thing. You can see it evolve, but it's good to have it in your mind much earlier.
When we started CBeyond, this was back 1999, 2000, I went to go talk to one of our early investors. We'd already raised the money, so we had the money in the bank, but he was a Stanford professor, ran a fund called Vantage Point Venture Partners, still runs it. And we were talking to him about our income statement, our projections and all that. And he said, no. He handed me a marker and he said, go to the whiteboard and explain your business in terms of unit economics. Like walk me from a customer pays you $1,000 a month. What are your costs of sales? What are you paying your reps? So you can really understand that per customer economics. Did we understand the core of our business? It's amazing to me. Some of our companies that are doing 100 million don't fully understand that. So the sooner you can really understand your unit and customer economics, the more that you can understand the levers in your business.
I would add one thing, which is the way we look at it is pretty similar. It's as you're starting out, it's product market fit. And a lot of product market fit is just experimenting, just seeing where things work, where they stick, where they don't. Then after you have product market fit, it's really all about growth. So we look at rule of 40, but typically we're more focused on the growth part of the equation. And there the mission is how do I build repeatability in my business? So if I'm a bootstrap founder doing sales calls and all of a sudden I hire a 3-person sales team, the question is, well, how do I make that sales team do what I did? And so you're building a lot of processes, playbooks, et cetera, so they can repeat what you're doing as a founder. And then obviously as your later stage, call it that 100 million, 200 larger, right? You're focused a little bit more on efficiency, EBITDA, CAC payback, et cetera, and you're taking those pieces of efficiencies and you're trying to get even distributions of performance. This is a go-to-market conference. So you're trying to get even distributions of performance across your sales team. So that, for example, if you have 10 salespeople, not one of them is selling all of your stuff. Because when we come in diligence, for example, we look at the metrics, but probably the second question I ask is do you have an even distribution of performance across your team? Because that tells me whether you've been able to build repeatability within your business.
I'm so glad you said that, Eric. I want to talk a little bit about that scalability and your understanding of what that diligence is to show that scalability. You spoke a lot about the sales teams and quickly ramping up a sales team. I know we have many sales leaders in the audience where you might have that founder-led sales, you might bring in your first VP of sales, but then you quickly expand that team. What are some of those specific metrics that you're looking at that tells you that this team can scale beyond that?
Yeah, so I always look at distribution of performance. I think I mentioned that already. But think about it this way, like you want a bell curve of performance across your sales team. So you want roughly 50% of those folks to be able to achieve plan if you've done a good job building that repeatability. And I look for that when we do diligences. The other thing I look for is, do you have repeated performance in some of those metrics, like pipeline generation, for example? Are you lumpy? Are you showing a steady increase over time, et cetera, et cetera? And what I'll add, and Jim said this before, the metric is an important place for me to understand where to drill in, right? But it's really what you've built underneath it that matters. So when I see, and I'll give you an example, I did a diligence about six months ago. And the top rep, there were 10 reps. The top rep for that firm had done 70% of their total sales over the past 3 years, right? So that tells me, oh crap, you got 8, 9 reps out there.
Someone got paid is what happened.
Yeah, somebody got paid, exactly. Exactly. They're not productive. Well, why are they not productive? And so then I ask, okay, do you have your sales stages written down? Do you have entry and exit criteria? Okay, well, how do you inspect deals when you meet with the sales team? Do you have a sales methodology, et cetera, et cetera? So it's really digging down into the processes, cadences, et cetera, operating routines that you've built to understand, hey, how might those be impacting the metrics that I see or we see?
Tim, I might layer on one. If I have one question I can ask in a due diligence session on go-to-market, and of course we already have all the financials and a lot of the other metrics, I'll ask MQL to SQL ratio. And you'll be amazed, like maybe not amazed, because I see how many of you nodding your head, how many companies have no idea what that is, and then you get into a whole stumbling block between, well, we're changing, every company is changing their MQL definition, their SQL definition. Those that understand it, understand what they're doing to improve it, yeah, I don't really care what it is necessarily. Of course, if it's 90%, that feels like an Olay going to the sales team, and if it's like 5%, I wonder, is there misalignment on what a marketing qualified lead is versus a sales qualified lead? But just understanding what it is and having a team that can act together, sales and marketing, talk about why it is where it is and where it's going, that really shows you how a team is aligned.
I think that's a great use of those early stage numbers that people can put to use immediately, whether you have an early stage marketing team or a sales team, and hopefully they're working together early on from day one. Jim, I want to talk to you a little bit about the past few years that we've seen in the venture space, how valuations have shifted. We were standing outside chatting a little bit before this panel about how those valuations have shifted. Have the metrics shifted as well? No longer are you seeing companies where it's churn at any expense and growth at any expense just because you need to gain that growth, but now we're really working toward that profitability. How have metrics shifted over the past few years, and if they have?
Yeah, it's a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, that it matters the stage. So if you're a company cresting 20 million in revenue, you better start having a really good view of Rule of 40. Because it's, and we always talked about Rule of 40, it's just become more of a, it's every, you'd have, I could say these investors care about Rule of 40 5 years ago. Now that would be everybody, right? There were the investors that cared about just growing and kind of looked at Rule of 40, didn't care. Everybody cares about Rule of 40 when you get over 20 million. So that's probably one of the bigger changes. I think when you're growing up until 20 million, we were talking about up here a second ago, you've got to understand the operating leverage in your business. And that comes down to what you were saying. Operating leverage starts with understanding the unit economics of my business so that I can prove to myself, oh, I'll have a path to Rule of 40 if I just keep doing what I'm doing. Scale will produce Rule of 40 over time. So I think that's at the early stages, that's the real key, is understanding that. And then, once you understand that, then it's just a matter of how quickly can I grow my business. And you're getting in what's the available market, what comes around that I can grow into. And another thing I liked you said was behind a metric, and your metrics are, they're a license to get a head fake. You have to know the why behind the metric, right? Why did that company grow 50%? Why does it have 110% net retention? And if you don't look at net retention by cohorts, you can get burned. There's so many layers to it. So I'd encourage you guys to understand the layers and obviously deliver the metric.
I think this is a good segue. Do you want to go ahead, Brock?
No, go ahead.
Thinking about a segue from getting behind those metrics, let's talk about the management team. What are you looking for? In the venture world, you often think about the track jockey and horse analogy. Who do you make that investment in? How do you evaluate a management team? And what are those metrics that can really tell you a little bit more about the management team? It's open.
It's open.
Oh, okay.
I'll jump in. So in the private equity world, you hear a lot about value creation plans. Have you heard value creation plan? It's really the key method that private equity firms use to align with management teams on this value creation plan, which is really just what are the 5 or 6 things we're going to try to accomplish over 5 years. And if by doing those things, we can actually accelerate our plan to accomplish them in 3 years. That's where a lot of those of us that are in the operating team focus. So I think that it starts with is the team aligned, and is the team aligned on that value creation plan? When we get into trouble is when the management team wants to go maybe think about growing at 40% and be break even, versus our value creation plan is focused more on maybe 25% growth and 15% EBITDA margin. And that's changed. It's got harder to create that alignment Because what's changed over the past few years is that we talk about rule of 40, but $1 of growth is typically worth more than $1 of EBITDA margin when you think about the enterprise value of a company longer term. If you go back 3 or 4 years ago, I saw stats that it was 10 or 11x. A point of growth was worth 10 or 11x a point of margin. Today, it's about 1.6. So the world's changed, right? I think what we're looking for is a management team that gets that and understands it. I was talking with Lance back there. We were talking about being very careful, too, about not just focusing on driving towards profitability, because there's going to be that time when you need the growth. And I've been caught in a situation where we were growing really well. The market, a public market, we were public at that time, said, hey, we want more profitability. And we drove to that, and then they said, oh, we want growth again. And getting growth started again is difficult.
Really hard.
You're kind of like keeping, as a go-to-market team, I would just suggest you keep 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake when those situations kind of come along. But that's where we're aligning with management teams to make sure that we're really making sure we're focused on the same thing.
The real answer there is just don't be a public company. Anybody that's ever been
That's all these gray hairs from the public company.
It's much better to grow businesses with schleps like us than the public.
I don't know why you'd want to be one now, for sure.
Everybody wants to do it one time.
It was fun.
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. This is probably the hardest question for me to really answer with simply just metrics. But we'll look at things like tenure of the team, turnover. One thing to understand, especially if you're a founder or entrepreneur, is that the skills and competencies required in you will change as the company grows, and they change significantly. And it's really important for you to look sort of around the corner or forward to say, hey, what skills do I need to build in order to still be effective in my role as my company grows? So for example, as a founder, you're probably not thinking about your classic sort of people leadership behaviors, staffing a big team, talent reviews, 9-box grids, et cetera. But those become quite important when you're a bigger company. But we actually, when we do a diligence, we actually do rate the management team, and we'll tell them what we rated them. And by and large, what it comes down to are things like, do you use, this is going to sound funny, but like, do you use facts to make decisions with, right? Now, when you're smaller, you do use your gut, and you should trust your gut in a lot of ways, right? But you should try and find the facts to prove yourself true or false. We look for things like, do you use repeatable processes to get things done? I mentioned a sales process, sales methodology, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think in terms of scale? And when we talk to you, do you talk about the team and the people and how you will grow them and how you will coach them over time? So, the metrics are, Jim said it much times already, but the metrics give us kind of a sense. But it's really these things like repeatability, using facts, et cetera, that are most important to us when we think about a management team. And even above and beyond that, how are you thinking about yourself and your own competencies and skill sets and how they need to change as you grow?
At our level, it's a $2 to $10 million company. First of all, the management team in 2 and 10 is like night and day. You can't have too many 2s. There's not enough hours in the day. You got to have some 10s. But you want to find leaders, obviously know their product, driven, all that stuff. That's the obvious stuff. But that are a little bit humble and very humble and open, and will talk to you and expose their vulnerabilities. Because as an investor, we know a lot of people. And if I know the blind spots of my CEO or CMO, then it's easy to help them plug in. I was just asking Jeff Perkins to talk to one of our, I was at a board meeting yesterday about what a great company we have in the field service management space in Dallas, about the same size as a company Jeff said when I first invested. And our CMO's got some blind spots. He's good, but a CMO's a big job. You can't be great at product, demand gen, everything. It's just, so you got to find, if you get your leadership team to expose where they need help so the board can help them, I think that's what I look for. When we're in diligence and you're talking to these teams, you can tell how people think. If it's my way or the highway, and honestly, there's just too many deals to do out there. We'll just back off and go, I don't want to be part of that.
I can't tell you how many times after a board meeting we'll just say, that team seems like they're having fun together.
Yeah.
They like each other. They want to spend time together, especially in this more hybrid world. we find teams that aren't getting together, that aren't spending quality time together, aren't performing as well. Whether that means going to an office or it just means making sure they have plenty of offsites. Like that, you may not be thinking that your board's paying attention to that, but we really notice that. And that's something that I think we look for in diligence. You know, these people that do they want, it's going to be hard. Whatever we're going to do is going to be hard. And so are they going to fight through that together? And we spend a lot of time thinking about the dynamics of that team.
Yeah, diligence, you think you're doing all this, you're kind of doing all this practical work, and at the same time, it's a big social experiment, right? You're trying to, and I'm being honest, it is, it really is. You're trying to say, you're learning how people think. And
that's where the MQL, SQL question comes in, because you just see, you can see the marketing and sales leader just say, they turn their backs on each other, or do they lean in together and have a plan?
Exactly.
I didn't mention this, but we do have an explicit rating for openness to like help.
Yeah.
But yeah, know where you're good, know where you're not good, and be upfront with it. But by the way, know where your company's good, and know where your company shouldn't play. And that's just as important.
I'm glad you brought in some of those different side of those metrics. That we often think of data metrics, we think of everything that is cut and dry, but what about these metrics that are? How does that team work together? How do they really collaborate and build and scale? I think that's something that we don't often think about. And what's unique about this panel, and I really think it's important to share, each one of our firms has a specific commitment to the portfolio from a resource perspective, whether it is an on-site team that you have at Insight, Eric, or how the Excel KKR team really dives in and immerses into every portfolio company. Jim, at Fulcrum, how you have this commitment to building and scaling these teams and giving them the resources they need to grow and to scale. So not only as a fiduciary responsibility to our LPs and our investors, but also to the founders themselves. I want to close out with a few different things. I have quite a few more questions, but I know we're short on time, and I also want to give some time to the audience to ask specific questions. I think one of the questions that we want to go through, we've been through a lot of the operational efficiencies, the technology, customer metrics. Let's talk a little bit about exit potential. So a lot of the focus is from both the founder and investor perspective here. How do you evaluate a company's potential exit opportunities, and what metrics are most relevant in that consideration?
Yeah, so at our scale, it's a lot, making sure there's a whole bunch of guys like this hanging around in the areas you're in, because we're growing these companies up towards, we'll start 2 to 10, take them to 30 to 50 million, and typically selling up the food chain to larger PE funds. And the founders, get to take some off the table and then roll some and get a whole nother lap with guys that are a lot smarter than we are. So it's knowing, I always say, hanging out in spaces that second level of PE firm is interested in. Field service management, donor management, nonprofit management, just this big, there's a bunch of them, right? But make sure we're in spaces that other people like. That's the biggest. And it's, strategics in there, but if these guys are in there, the strategics must be in there because they're thinking about that, right? So we pay a lot of attention to that.
Yeah.
I would say, when you think about exiting to a PE firm, I think our average is something like 4 or 5 years from the time that we meet the CEO and the founding team to the time we make an investment, right? So this is not like hire a banker and then 6 months later you get a check from us. I mean, a lot of this is relationship building, even when you're 5, 10 million. And so I'm actually amazed, like having been an operator, I would take a call from anyone. I would meet as many people as possible. I'm amazed at how many CEOs and founding teams don't try to network to firms. And I think it's just building up that. So I would encourage you to take the call from our analyst and get to know the firm. That's my top of funnel work right there, Andrew.
No, it's really right. Be selfish. They'll learn, whether it's a banker, they'll tell you about your competitors. Yep. They'll tell you about your competitors. You can learn so much. You're foolish not to take those calls.
We give a ton away. Like we will come in and tell you how we think we can grow with you. We will tell you, as you say, just about your competitors. So yes, engage that community. It's kind of like, the last thing you want to do is show up to a really important interview and have it be your first interview. So I would get that
it's reps.
Going. Get those reps going for sure.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up with just one last question to each of you, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. We have just a few minutes left. 2024 and going into 2025, I know summer solstice, about to kick it off. We're halfway almost through the year. What is one piece of advice or one area that you would recommend to revenue leaders right now to close out the year and prepare for the next year to focus on?
Mine's always at our stage. Are you ready with the top of funnel velocity and the A's to process that funnel for next year? And you really, if you're not thinking about that in the middle of June, you won't get caught up in that. You'll enter the year flat-footed. So it's like, it's hard because you're halfway through the year, having hit the number this year, but how are we ready for next year? And so middle of the year, you really got to be thinking what is achievable next year, not what we would love to push to, but what's reasonably achievable, and making sure you set yourself up from a sales and marketing top of funnel and sales team to achieve that.
I think really quick, I mean, back to that 1 foot on the brake, 1 foot on the gas. I am advising a lot of the go-to-market leaders, have your baseline budget, but be ready for the 3 or 4 growth initiatives so that when your board or your CEO says pull the trigger, that you're not like, okay, let me go think about what we could go do. You have the 3 things. When someone says, where would you put the next dollar of marketing? Where do you put the next dollar of sales? You're ready to go. And not just like little bets, like what are the 3 or 4 big bets you could make to really accelerate growth if and when that time comes?
I love it. I'm actually going to add on to this because we actually do a ton of work with companies that have growth plans and they have no clue how they're going to hit them, right? They might have an idea of 2 or 3 initiatives they might drive to hit those targets, but I actually do a ton of work just simply helping a company build, quote unquote, the business case for, hey, if I think I can grow by, I don't know, 20% next year, to use simple numbers, the math tells me if I hire 4 more salespeople, I'll grow by 5%. If I invest this much in demand gen, given the efficiency, that'll get me another 7%. So we see a lot of both late and early companies go into the new year thinking, well, I'll do these 3 things and I'm pretty sure they'll work. And you go, well, can you literally take me through the waterfall of how that helps you achieve plan? And they can. And it's not because they're stupid, it's because it takes time. It takes a lot of time to do this. So with larger stage companies, we actually start this process in August for a January rollout. Now, for smaller companies, it's not going to start that soon, but you should start thinking now and attempt to quantify how those initiatives that you want to run will pay off.
Yeah, some of the best go-to-marketing teams are testing and learning, and taking those little tests that you do, give validation to these bigger bets that you want to make. And so if you can be doing that now, then you're not just going in and saying, hey, I think we should do this big new initiative. You can say, we think we should do it because we've been learning this, doing kind of small campaigns that can be amplified.
Thank you. Let's take 1 or 2 questions, if there are any in the audience, before we wrap up.
Can you comment on your perception that you go to Northeast, you go to West Coast, the gray matter and the green matter stays in the ecosystem after a founder has an exit? Regrettably, the perception is Atlanta is just still dragging behind that mindset. In terms of thinking big, what do you believe it's going to take for financial partners to think bigger with founders to build and scale something?
I'll tell you, 25 years ago when I moved here, it was a desert, right? It's a lot different today than it was. Paul Judge said an interesting comment to me when I made that same kind of statement maybe 10 years ago. He said, money travels. Insights now here, you've got how many people here?
4 or 5
4 or 5 people
here.
here. Excel KKR is here. We now have 30 or 40 people here. I think more and more funds see Atlanta, not just earlier stage, but all stages see Atlanta as an opportunity. It's so easy to get here. You're not going to see a lot of firms set up shop here like maybe we have, but Atlanta is on the map like it hasn't been before.
And part of that's we've built bigger companies. Having been around this ecosystem a long time, we used to celebrate $100 million exits, right? That was and now we've got a number of $1 billion plus exits, right? So we're building bigger companies. Founders are holding on to that equity longer and growing it longer and taking second and third laps with that business. Part of that is all the capital that allows them to do that. The maturity of the PE market has produced so much capital, you can hold on to a company and grow it a really long time. Why wouldn't I take 2/3 off, roll a third, and do this again, and just keep doing that? I know this business better than anything. So it's a little bit it's the ecosystem. A lot of it is university talent, and then the capital traveling here.
Why was this question important? What's the relevance of having investors local?
Well, I think going back to so when you're out in San Francisco and you go to the Grove, which is, I don't know if you've been to the Grove, it's where everyone, if you're sitting in the Grove, you can hear people raising money, right? It's just, there's an ecosystem, right? It literally floats around, right? Or you're in Palo Alto, there's a couple of cafes. When you walk down Palo Alto, you see people raising their first fund. So they're talking to like an LP or, so there's that kind of energy. But I think we're creating that. Like what David's done with Tech Village, what Blake and Bill are doing with Tech Square Ventures and Engage, and there's the energy here is a lot more. So I think the question is really around, is there a community? And, Rachel and I were talking, we used to spend tons of time down at the ATDC together, right? So I think, if you're not doing that and you're not in the community, I mean, it's a lot different. When I was here 25 years ago, it was like Bell South and Mindspring and CBeyond, right?
It's really important because when you have the larger capital in, it takes companies further, which creates billion-dollar companies. Those billion-dollar companies, those guys and gals that make money, feed it right back into the early stage. We've got more early stage funds in Atlanta than we've ever had because we've had more exits at the top. So that, we didn't have that years ago. We didn't have billion-dollar exits, right? We had $100 million exits. There's not a lot of funds started at $100 million exits. I mean, David's the only one.
Yeah. I think,
Yeah.
and to that point, it keeps the talent here. A decade ago, the talent was leaving. You had incredible engineers coming out of the best engineering school in the country, out of Georgia Tech, and they were leaving. They were going to the Bay Area. They were going to the Northeast. We're keeping that talent now. You're seeing mega Fortune 500 companies setting up shop in Atlanta. You see, Microsoft, Airbnb, you have all these, and Google in Midtown, and they are here to retain that talent, and it brings other students to these schools, and that's the talent you want in your startups and to grow a lot of what you're doing.
Okay, education, quality of life, and capital.
Right.
I mean, it's,
Yeah.
I mentioned the Grove, but that Starbucks at 5th and Spring is our version of that, right?
It's true. I know that they've got the red numbers now ticking for us, so we've gone over. I think LinkedIn, the best way for people to get in touch with each of you.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Eric, Brooks, Jim. Such a pleasure.